Welcome to the debate. Today, we're diving into the blueprints of rhetorical strategy, really looking at what makes some arguments stand strong and others, well, fall apart. Our source material, excerpts from Deconstructing Debate, Argument, Architecture, and Strategy, gives us a really great high-stakes case study, the proposed Jay-Z Times Square casino.
Yeah, and this isn't just, a local zoning thing. It's actually a masterclass in how arguments are structured. We're dissecting the architecture, the sort of scaffolding beneath the facts, to understand how both sides tried to win over New Yorkers. The core question, I think, remains, is this proposal, when you look at its structure, actually good business, or is it bad planning?
Right. So I'll be looking at the strength of the affirmative case, the pro-casino side, focusing on how it was built around this idea of addition and progress. It's a framework that really relies on a narrative of growth, of momentum, trying to overwhelm any opposition.
And I'll be exploring the opposition's structural response. This one's framed more around impact and strategic expansion. The approach here is really dedicated to neutralizing those initial claims from the pro side and, crucially, redefining what progress even means for a city like New York.
Okay, so the pro-casino argument, it was really designed to generate this immediate, almost undeniable momentum. And it did this using basically three interlocking rhetorical pillars. First off, the big one, the promise of creating jobs and opportunities. Now, this is more than just a number, right? It's leveraging a really powerful community empowerment narrative.
And attaching a figure like Jay-Z, he has huge cultural credibility, a track record of success that tries to lift the project beyond just typical corporate development.
Exactly. It tries to frame the whole venture as almost a form of social good, a local success story bringing opportunity back home, which, of course, makes it emotionally quite difficult to oppose. Then the second strategy leans heavily on the appeal to magnitude, this promise of billions in investment for NYC. The sheer scale, billions. It's engineered to make opponents seem, fiscally irresponsible if they stand in the way.
That scale is definitely compelling on the surface, yeah. But the negative side's architecture kind of anticipated that move.
Right, which leads to the third strategy that sort of locks it down. This rhetorical question, why stop progress in Times Square? This uses a really deeply ingrained progress narrative, and it attempts to set up a false dichotomy. You're kind of forced into a position. Either you're for this kind of big, undeniable progress, or, you're just a reactionary, someone fundamentally anti-progress.
And that false dichotomy, that's the core trap the affirmative sets, isn't it? So the anti-side structure, its architecture, it has to be powerful enough to dismantle that, right away. So the opposition focused on deconstruction and redefinition. Our first counterclaim goes straight for the heart of that emotional appeal. Look, this isn't Jay-Z's casino, it's Caesars plus S.L. Green using his name.
You're describing what the source material calls the deconstruction of the figurehead.
Precisely. We're not, denying his involvement entirely, but strategically reframing him, taking this beloved individual and pointing out he's, maybe a highly paid spokesperson for these massive corporate entities. And that move works to neutralize the emotional goodwill, that community empowerment feeling, and it forces the audience to look past the famous face to the actual corporate balance sheet.
That's a calculated risk, though. Because if you fail, you just look petty, right? Trying to tear down a successful figure. But if you succeed, you've robbed the argument of its moral high ground.
Exactly. That calculated risk is central to the strategy. Then, the second counterclaim introduces what we could call a zero-sum counterpremise. Times Square is already a massive destination. Putting a casino here just cannibalizes existing traffic. So we immediately shift the focus away from the abstract idea of new investment and towards the very tangible potential for economic displacement.
So you're challenging the basic premise that the economic pie automatically gets bigger with this kind of project.
Absolutely. And then our third strategic move is really about seizing the high ground. We propose that, airports or the outer boroughs make more sense because they add new value instead of stripping existing value. This propose a superior alternative strategy is vital. It reframes the opposition. They're not just anti-casino. No, they're positioned as champions of smart, strategic, value-additive urban planning.
That third point, yeah, that successfully shifts the burden of proof back onto the pro side, doesn't it? They now have to defend why Times Square specifically is better than a completely new growth area.
It forces the comparison, which is exactly what, sophisticated debate architecture has to do.
Okay, so that brings us right to our first core conflict point, the nature of capital investment. So from my perspective, representing the pro side architecture, I'd argue that the massive influx of capital, the billions promised, is an inherent good. My argument rests on this idea of addition. It asserts that, new tourism generated by the casino, global marketing efforts, conference revenue, this will inevitably expand the economic pie for the city. The city gains new streams of revenue it simply didn't have before.
I'm sorry, but I don't automatically buy that this influx means net growth for the city as a whole. The economic impact theme, the counterargument, it really challenges that assumption that new capital automatically equals new value. When we look closely at the Times Square ecosystem, you've got Broadway, restaurants, existing retail, hotels. We realize there's maybe a somewhat fixed, local, and even tourist entertainment budget.
But those are local dollars, maybe. Aren't we talking about attracting global dollars? New money flowing in?
And that's the point of contention, right? If the capital influx is primarily coming from funds that would have otherwise been spent on other forms of entertainment, potentially right within the existing Times Square area, well, then it just displaces that activity. It's like you're taking $10 from a theater ticket and moving it over to a slot machine. So from this architectural viewpoint, it's not growth. It's more like a violent reshuffling of existing resources. And it could potentially cripple smaller, pre-existing businesses just for the benefit of one giant corporate entity. It's economic displacement, really, not addition.
Okay, but the framing of the project using celebrity as visionary, that's still immensely effective, I think, at distracting from that zero-sum analysis you're presenting. It leverages Jay-Z's powerful reputation, allowing the project advocates to frame the venture almost as a civic duty, right? A form of genuine community empowerment. And that narrative gives the project a kind of moral authority that, simple financial projections probably couldn't achieve on their own.
That's a compelling point about the narrative's power. But have you considered how the opposition successfully frames this as celebrity as facade? That deconstruction strategy we talked about, it asserts that the public figure, no matter how respected they are, is functionally just a branding tool. A tool used to obscure the real interests of the larger, often faceless corporate entities like Caesars and SL Green behind the scenes.
So the argument is that the emotional goodwill is being strategically misdirected.
Absolutely. By forcing the audience to separate the popular persona from the project's complex financial structure, who really benefits, who carries the risk, the anti-side effectively neutralizes that emotional appeal. And it successfully demands deeper scrutiny of the underlying business model. It stops the public figure from becoming a kind of shield against the tough questions about the project's actual financials and impacts.
Okay, this leads us directly to the core philosophical disagreement we identified earlier, which is really about defining progress itself. So my position, drawing on the pro site's architecture, defines progress essentially as density. Adding a major development like this to an already saturated economic hub like Times Square, well, it maximizes efficiency. You're building where the infrastructure, the transit, the eyeballs, they already support maximum population and traffic. Progress is concentration, making the core even stronger.
See, I would argue that's a deeply short-sighted and structurally flawed definition of progress for a city. The anti-casino framework successfully redefines progress as strategic expansion. True progress in this view means smart growth. It means creating entirely new economic centers, adding value where it's genuinely needed most. I mean, why should we increase the saturation risk and the potential for displacement in Times Square, which is already incredibly dense?
Because the money, the investment, it follows the existing network effects. It follows the global visibility of a place like Times Square. That's where you get the biggest bang for your buck, arguably.
But strategic expansion asks the crucial question. What if that same investment, those billions, were placed out near the airports or in an outer borough that currently lacks large-scale development? That investment could act as a genuine catalyst, couldn't it? transforming an entire untapped local economy, creating jobs there rather than just concentrating more wealth and activity in an area that's already, frankly, saturated. The anti-side positions themselves as the champions of strategic, long-term, equitable urban planning.
So the difference really boils down to whether you prioritize efficiency in leveraging existing infrastructure, what we're calling density, or whether you prioritize new value creation and geographic equity, strategic expansion. That logical battleground, I think you're right, that's where this debate was really fought and perhaps won and lost in the public sphere.
The source material highlights the pro-casino side's final, quite potent tactical move. This personal appeal, almost bordering on an ad hominem argument. People just don't want to see Jay-Z win.
Ooh, yeah, that's an intellectual gut punch, isn't it? It's really designed to do one thing: shift the entire debate away from the project's merits, or lack thereof, and onto the opponent's perceived motives, jealousy maybe, malice, bias. It's a clear attempt to invalidate the opponent's credibility simply by questioning why they oppose it.
It's a high-risk, high-reward rhetorical bomb. So how did the opposition manage to disarm it so cleanly? Well, they executed what the source calls the principled reframe. They responded with something like, no, this was never about Jay-Z. It was about protecting NYC's ecosystem from a flawed model.
Right. By immediately dismissing the personal attack entirely, they refused to give it any oxygen, denied it traction. And crucially, as you said, they elevated the conversation right back up to core civic-minded principles, protecting NYC's ecosystem, analyzing a potentially flawed model.
That move is masterful, architecturally speaking, because it seizes the high ground back. They maintain their intellectual credibility by refusing to get dragged down into a weaker argument about personality, and they instantly return the focus to public interest and strategic integrity. Very effective.
So this entire case study, drawn from our source material, it really shows us how specific arguments, the ones about jobs or investment or location, they aren't just standalone points. They're fundamentally integrated into these larger structural frameworks.
Yeah, the affirmative case, the pro-casino side, focused on addition, building that irresistible narrative of momentum, of progress, appealing to scale and emotion.
While the negative case focused squarely on impact, questioning the foundational premise, bringing up zero-sum growth, corporate transparency issues, while importantly offering a clear, seemingly superior alternative vision.
And both structural models, we should stress, are credible, evidence-based positions that, reasonable experts could hold.
I think the ultimate lesson in argument architecture here is pretty clear. You have to lead with a strong value proposition, yes, but you also must be prepared to dismantle your opponent's foundational premise, not just pick at their surface facts. And finally, you have to successfully seize that high ground, framing your conclusion around key resonant values. The Jay-Z casino debate really offers a clear structural blueprint for almost any strategic disagreement, I think. And it forces all of us to decide which architectural framework, progress as density or progress as strategic expansion, is actually the better model for civic strategy moving forward.
We hope we've managed to illuminate some of the sophisticated structural conflict that sits right at the heart of these complex urban debates. The structural conflict definitely remains, leaving the final decision on, well, which model is superior, ultimately, to the listener.